Hormones.
Yeah. Yep, about it. So the word of the morning is homeostasis, right?
That's right.
So hormones, long acting. Are there any hormones that are short acting?
Yes.
Couple. We'll kind of talk about those. But typically they're long acting. Why does that matter?
Because it affects over.
Because it helps us.
Absolutely. So the idea that it's going to be a long-acting regulation of the body, right? Without that, we're in trouble. Right? What else can you tell me about endocrine system? Absolutely, in a huge way, right? Either hyper or hypo or normal, right? Okay. Renal system is affected in a big way, and I'm going to show you that in the next hour. We'll talk about a little bit here in terms of preventing and the like stuff. But we're specifically getting into that in the next hour. Right. What else can you talk about?
Use the circulatory system to disperse the hormones.
Yeah. So the idea in terms of the endocrine system itself, it can work locally around certain areas, but the overall scheme of things is it needs the blood system to work. What does that mean to you? So that should be fairly significant to you.
It's specifically related to cardiovascular.
Very good. So the cardiovascular system is in the toilet. How well the hormone is going to work? How well is money going to be released in terms of saying, hey, kidney, you do your thing a little bit better? Boom, right? And so the idea in terms of hormones, like everything else you're hearing this morning, is tied into something else in order to need it to work. Okay? Let's go. So you need to know the difference between endocrine gland and exocrine gland. Just the word sounds. Endo within, exo on the outside. Endocrine gland is a ductless gland that secretes hormones directly into the bloodstream, so it causes this systemic effects and specific action on target tissues. Exocrine, on the other hand, is a local duct, if you will, a duct gland that secretes hormones to nearby tissues through something. Sweat, saliva, tears, mucus, digestive juices are all part of that. Okay? So when we talk about exocrine, where we hear more and more about exocrine? Skin is, yes, part of it, but digestive system is exocrine in terms of what it does. Okay? Endocrine gland is everything else. Hormones are a chemical substance released by a gland that controls or affects process in the body system. I was talking about this earlier this morning. Lock and key. Specific places to where it goes. The receptor has to be in the right place. Has to be released to get there. Metabolism then is the sum of all cellular processes that produce the energy of molecules. Again, what we're talking about first thing this morning, we talked about ATP as being part of energy. That's this right here in terms of controlling this metabolism. When we build up, it's called anabolism. When we break down, it's called catabolism of biochemical substances to produce energy. You've already told me this. It provides long-term communication between cells. It uses chemicals to get there. So the idea that it's only as good as the bloodstream is kind of what we're talking about. Target cells possess the receptors necessary to bind with specific hormones, lock and key. Target cells can be anywhere in the body. They're located all over the body in terms of the way they work and in terms of the way they function. The hormone release occurs where capillaries are abundant. Okay? That's pretty interesting, right? The idea that it's got to be something where blood flow can be delivered to, but where it's going to work in. The effects of hormones are slow to appear. So check this out. In about 3 weeks, I've been talking about this all morning long. We're talking about acid-base balance. And I'm going to tell you that there's 3 different systems that control our system as far as acid and base. One of them is bicarbonate, I should say. One of them is the respiratory system. One of them is the renal system. Do you know which one is the slowest one? The renal system. You know that it takes hours, sometimes days for it to start kicking in. But do you know which system is going to be the most persistent in terms of taking care of the body? The renal system. It's because of this right here. Renin is a chemical. It's one of the hormones that gets released. Aldosterone we're talking about. ADH we're going to talk about. The idea that these hormones all play a long-term effect in terms of controlling the body. That's this right here. The endocrine system plays an important role in regulating body function. You should know that with homeostasis by now. There's 8 major glands as part of the endocrine system. There's a 9th one that's called pineal gland. 8 is typically what we talk about the most. Closely linked to the nervous system. So while the circulatory system on the endocrine, the circulatory system carries it, the nervous system is the one in terms of receptor that says you need to do something more as far as this goes. And there they are. So we're going to break these down and kind of talk about it. But the master gland that we hear about is always the hypothalamus, located within the brain itself, deep within the brain itself. So check this out. I find this kind of interesting. The placenta. In utero, placenta releases HCG through gestation. When a woman finds out that she's pregnant, when that little pregnancy test turns blue, any idea as to what's going on? HCG. Just an example of how hormones get released in terms of whatever's going on with the body itself. Digestive tract, gastrin and secretin get released in terms of us taking a large meal. If you were to sit down and have a 4-course meal tonight for dinner, the idea that soon after that meal, this is going to start getting released in terms of breaking everything down over a period of time. Not over a matter of minutes, but over a long term. Okay? We talk about the heart. We're talking about adrenergic hormone, stretching of atrial walls due to high blood pressure. Is that a good thing?
Yeah.
Gotta have it. We're going to talk about Frank Starling in a moment. You're going to start hearing it on Monday. But we're going to hear about the fact that the stretching of the ventricles and stretching of the atrial walls due to this high blood pressure. So the antagonist is this release to try to take care of that. I've been telling you about renin. We're going to talk about renin specifically in the next hour. So we've already talked about the fact that it has systemic effects, specific targets, may have single or multiple targets along the way. So that when you have a disorder that's part of this thing, that it plays a huge part in terms of how well the hormones are going to work wherever they're at in the body. I think I got a slide. Yeah, this. So it looks like a crazy slide, but just listen to me for just a second. All they're showing on the slide, the fact is all kinds of disease processes that take place when hormones don't work, or the disease process takes place where the hormones can't work. Okay. For example, diabetes right here in terms of glucose metabolism works off the pancreas, right? But there's something that's called Addison's disease that we're going to talk about. There's something that's called Cushing's disease we're going to talk about. There's something that's called hypothyroidism that we're going to be talking about. And all the disease processes around here, you don't need to memorize the slide, but all the disease processes around that have an issue in terms of hormones, how well they're going to work and not work. Make sense? So hormones of the hypothalamus and pituitary gland, the idea that these two are linked together anatomically, deep within the brain, okay? And they play a part in terms of releasing all kinds of different hormones along the way. The crazy thing about the hypothalamus is that while it starts in the brain, it goes literally all over the body in terms of creating its effect over a period of time. You don't need to memorize the slide, but let me give you the short version to it. Hypothalamus is located in the junction between the CNS and the endocrine system. So it plays a part in the nervous system. Remember we were talking about how it's linked to the nervous system? That's this right here. Some cells relay messages from the autonomic nervous system. What's that about? Autonomic nervous system.
Automatic response?
Yeah, that's the simple way of doing it. We'll dive in deeper, but that would be the starting point right now, yeah. So it's part of the relay system in terms of the autonomic nervous system as to how well it works. There's other cells that respond to glands to release those hormones. If you back to the kidneys would be a good example. Back to the kidneys, that If you suddenly get up and go for a run, the idea that renin within the kidney will start releasing itself based on that, okay? So other cells can initially play a part that causes the hormone then to take over a period of time. And you can see with hypothalamus that part of it is about growth hormone. What is for you? Three mechanisms of hypothalamus. Number one is the secretion of regulatory hormones to control activity throughout the pituitary gland throughout the rest of the body. Number two, there's production of ADH and oxytocin. We talked about oxytocin this morning, and obviously on a day out basis, oxytocin is not released, right? But what is ADH? And when is it released, and what's it all about? Why would they retain water? You're right. Blood pressure being too high or too low. Absolutely. So one of the functions that happens out of this is that we're going to hang on to urine. So what? Why does that matter? Say again?
Get rid of the waste.
Yeah, but waste. The problem is that waste is not released. Urine is just sitting there. It's not being released. We no longer pee at that point in time.
That's it. pH balance.
So the idea that ADH is released when somebody's in shock, somebody's losing fluids, somebody has been vomiting over the past 2 days. The idea that it's going to hang on to fluids because there's a whole bunch of fluids that's already been released. Okay? Antidiuretic hormone is about the fact of hanging on to fluids versus getting rid of them. ADH is in some degree about diabetes as well. We'll talk about that further and much deeper.
So it's probably a bunch of ADH, people like shock or something like that. You're retaining those fluids, you're not urinating as much, that lead to toxicity.
Over a long period of time. But the idea, remember, the idea is that it's trying to regulate the system. It's trying to regulate homeostasis. So while if we're talking about days and weeks and that kind of thing, absolutely. But the idea in terms of the short term, it's trying to regulate the ship. And then 3 is controlling the sympathetic output to adrenal medulla, okay? So sitting right on top of the kidneys is the adrenal medulla, okay? It sits there and it releases cortisol, and it releases epinephrine and norepinephrine. So the idea in terms of all this is control the sympathetic nervous system. Pituitary gland, size of the P, located at the base of the hypothalamus, divided into posterior and anterior gland. Considered to be the master gland, secretes 9 different hormones. Okay, so pituitary gland and hypothalamus run hand in hand in terms of where it's located and some of the functions that it does. There's again where production of ADH come from, and yeah, we're going to tie it in when we start talking about the renal system in the next hour. I don't care that you remember posterior versus anterior pituitary gland right now, but more so in terms of pituitary gland and what it does. So again, take a look in terms of some of the things that it does. Growth hormone releases, this is what I was looking for before, corticosteroid, okay? So the idea in terms of the immune system is tied into this, okay? So this gets released in terms of anything that's going on with the immune system. This gets released in terms of aldosterone. Aldosterone is about the sympathetic nervous system. So anterior pituitary is to a certain degree about taking care of the sympathetic nervous system. You don't need to remember all of these right here. Thyroid gland. Thyroid gland, more popular in terms of both the disease processes and the function of what it does. It lies anterior to the trachea, so it's back in here. It's a butterfly shape in terms of life. So to that, what some of the things you hear about thyroid? Issues with thyroid. Yeah, so the idea that we're going to talk about hyperthyroidism, we're going to talk about Cushing's, we're going to talk about hypo and hyper, both in terms of disease process. You can also have cancer of the thyroid gland as well. Has a very extensive blood supply. So there's a bunch. When we start talking about crikes, there's one more thing that we'll be talking about in terms of the thyroid gland that's kind of connected to that as well. So thyroid gland releases T4, T3, and all that is about metabolism. So the big thing about the thyroid gland is exactly that. So that's why when you have hyper or hypo, you have somebody that's too hot or too cold. So hyper in terms of stimulation, hypo in terms of very, very sluggish along the way. And that's what we're talking about with hyper and hypothyroidism. Thyroid hormones are also released to ATP production. There you go about energy one more time as far as what it does. Is the thyroid gland working well when somebody's in cardiac arrest? Nope. One more reason as to why ATP is not being produced with somebody's in cardiac arrest. Thyroid hormones and energy use metabolic rate increases, more heat generated, and body temperature rises. This is the whole thing in terms of disease process of thyroid. Vasopressin, the drug vasopressin has some element of ATP. So that was kind of the theory several years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, that you would give vasopressin in lieu of epinephrine. And that vasopressin would do better in terms of ATP in the system than interferon. So in answer to the question, jury's still out.
Is that because there's something that's not missing, or we just don't fully?
I don't know that we fully understand that. It kind of came out of the wind, and you might want to try this and see. Thyroid gland also produces a calcium. What's calcium for? Bone. Good. What else? Electrical conduction within the heart itself. Okay. So again, you have a problem with thyroid. You think you might have a problem in terms of calcium for the heart. You think you might have a problem in terms of bone growth. Parathyroid glands, small pea-shaped glands located in the neck near the thyroid. Stimulates calcium release. And again, more than anything else, folks, you don't need to memorize the slide, but just have a general idea as to what these different glands do. Thymus is located in the median thymus. So the crazy thing about this is that thymus is almost always exclusively in pediatrics. And if you look right here on the mediastinum in kids, sometimes you'll see like this exaggerated thing that's right about here. What we're talking about is the thymus and that. It kind of disappears over a period of time. So as we get older and older, we kind of walk away from this itself. This is part of regulation as a child. Kind of walks away from not needing it as we get older. Yeah, the other interesting thing about this is T lymphocytes is associated with leukemia. And so that when you have a child, especially with leukemia at a very young age, part of the thing that's going on is some sort of issue in terms of the thymus. So pancreas, we're going to camp here. Tell me about the pancreas. I know what it says up there, but tell me about it. Good. Good. What else? What other function does the pancreas have? I'm sorry. So it does have a small part in the lymphatic system, not great, but some. What else? Absolutely, and you kind of heard that in that video this morning. We'll talk about that here in just a second. What else? It has endocrine function and exocrine function. Endocrine function in terms of regulating blood sugar and insulin. Exocrine in terms of digestion. So pancreas, sits right out here, has two different functions along the way. Now, because it sits right here, what might be the problem? Absolutely. What about trauma? Yeah, so it is vascular, but the other idea that if you take a shot to the pancreas, what's going to get affected by it? Your blood, or excuse me, your blood glucose. Okay? So the idea that you have somebody that is hypoglycemic, that has no problems in terms of diabetes, and yet they take a trauma to this right here, might be one of the reasons as to why they're hypoglycemic along the way. Exocrine tissues create this digestive juices. Endocrine tissues secrete hormones. So you need to know glucogenolysis, and you need to know gluconeogenesis. I'll let you write them down. Yep.
Pretty bad blood trauma area. Just adding E50
Yep.
to that.
You're going to treat them. You're going to treat them you normally would, but it starts to explain to why they might have it when you don't expect it to happen.
And if there was any person understanding of the video,
All right. So tell me in your own words, glycogenolysis. You're there. You're on the track.
Blood sugar system.
Sex. Close. Look over here.
You can say your blood sugar perhaps is too low, so it's going to send glucagon to the liver.
So check this out. The blood sugar doesn't have to be low in order for this to work. This works after every single meal that you have. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, anything along the way. We'll start to break this down in terms of getting glucose. So the fact that you see lysis, it's going to be cutting it down. The fact that you see glucose with it, it's going to be about glucose. Okay? So break down the glucose. Okay? The idea that you take a meal in, the idea that you take food in, is going to offer it up to the liver. Gluconeogenesis is, take a look at it. So you have glucose, you have new, you have starch. Okay? So conversion of protein and fat into glucose. Okay? So it offers it up over a period of time in terms of glucose. So the idea in terms of the liver and the pancreas being tied in together comes from this right here. Initially, when we take foods in, initially it goes through the liver, and it starts there as far as the breakdown of that. But the pancreas then plays a part as far as glucagon that comes back up to this right here.
Can we have a question on other beta cells that do insulin?
We'll come back to that in just a second. See if I can't take care of it. Endocrine cells produce two different hormones. Glucagon, that is alpha cells, and insulin, which is beta cells. And we're going to talk some more about that. Regulation of blood glucose concentrations. When our blood sugars are too high, beta cells will start kicking in. Oh, by the way, that's releasing insulin. What does insulin do in the blood? How does it do that? You're right. How does it do that?
Stores glucose.
But that's not specific to insulin. How does it do that? You're right. You're spot right there. So I know I'm dating myself, but you remember Fat Albert, right? They go that, right? Couldn't move through a door, right? Well, glucose is much the same way. Glucose is a huge molecule and can't cross the cell membrane all by itself. So the idea that insulin picks up glucose, picks it across the cell membrane, and puts it into the bloodstream so that energy then, ATP, can be transported throughout, specifically the brain, is a function of insulin. Okay? Without insulin, a glucose going on with them. No insulin production or very little insulin production all by themselves, right? At least with type 2, there's typically some insulin being produced, not adequate, but some insulin being produced in terms of taking care of blood glucose. Make sense? So the difference in terms of alpha versus beta cells, this is where it's coming from. It stimulates glucose transport and utilization in target cells. Cell membranes of most cells contain some sort of insulin receptors. So throughout the body, specifically the brain, specifically the heart. All right, this is what I was talking about a little bit earlier. Within the pancreas, it produces about 25% is an alpha cell or glucagon, which is going to increase your glucose. So check this out before we go any further. Let's suppose that you haven't eaten all day long. I know I'm talking about food you're getting hungry right now. But the idea is you haven't eaten all day long, and why is it then that 9 o'clock tonight your blood glucose can still be normal if you're not diabetic? Where's the reserve coming from? That right there. That's still communicating between the pancreas and the liver that will continue using whatever stores are there. Okay? This is the reason why you can go for hours without having to eat, that the body can take care of itself. Now, what about diabetics? Absolutely. Not only does it burn quickly, but it doesn't have the insulin in terms of carrying. So it's a twofold type of problem. Beta cells, about 60% secrete insulin and lowers the glucose. Delta cells or somatin cells that I was telling you about this morning, we don't have a real clear understanding about it, but the belief is that it's going to help regulate both the alpha cells and the beta cells. Okay? So 3 different cells within 3 different hormones within the pancreas, and it has a huge function. Now we're going to spend hours when we get into endocrine system out in the open. We're going to talk about this ad nauseam. But you need to understand now as to what the difference is between alpha cells and the beta cells and how they function and where they come from. Yes.
How far do you need to go to like help one out?
You don't. So you saw the video that we took like I don't know if you saw this video yet or not. These alpha cells and beta cells come from the islet of Langerhans. I would like to have been around to see how they discovered islet of Langerhans. So adrenal glands. Adrenal glands sit right on top of the kidney. That's what this is right here. And they secrete a couple different hormones. Interesting in terms of how they work. They have something to do with our what am I trying to say? With our well-being, but they also play a part in terms of sympathetic nervous system. So the inner side of this produces epinephrine and norepinephrine. That's nice. What's this all about right here? Yeah, and this is the fight part. Okay? So sympathetic nervous system, it has an effect, it has a huge effect in terms of the sympathetic nervous system. Next hour, when we're talking about the renal system, we're talking about the fact that when renin ends up in the lungs and converts over to angiotensin II is going to say, hey, adrenal medulla, you need to increase your work. Okay? So the heart rate goes up. The other thing it does, what I was trying to come out of my mouth a couple of seconds ago, but couldn't quite get there, was that it has an effect on cortisol. And cortisol is about the immune system. Cortisol is about fighting off infections. So think about the adrenal medulla and think about the fact that it has 2 different functions: sympathetic and immune system. We're going to talk some more about aldosterone coming up here in just a couple seconds. We talked about these as being reproductive, but it all plays a part in terms of these together. Speaking of reproductive, the idea that females primarily with estrogen and progesterone, and male with testosterone. The idea that when look at the commercial in the evening time, low T, the idea that they're taking supplemental shots because of testosterone. The idea that fertility and infertility is about sometimes increased estrogen and progesterone. And as we get into GYN much later in life, we're going to talk much more as to how this works in terms of the menstrual cycle. Melatonin. What's melatonin about? Sleep, right? So the idea in terms of regulation of sleep. Now, firefighters. The idea that you're sleeping, that you're on duty, you're sleeping, bells go off at 2 in the morning. What's it that? That's right here. Okay? The idea that you wake up suddenly and start moving right along. The idea in terms of melatonin is the problem. Now there are some studies. It's not conclusive, but there's some studies that the high mortality rate of firefighters once they retire may be due back to this right here. And that's theory at this point, but that's the thing that people. All right, let's get this whirl and see what happens. If not, we'll go.
Hi, I'm Anderson, and welcome to the Endocrine System podcast. There, that guy, his name is Robert Wambo. That guy, I have no idea what his name is. But Robert Wambo is the tallest man that we have on the day. He was something like 8 feet, 11 and a half inches at the time of his death. And he was that tall because he was a pituitary giant. In other words, he had a tumor, we now know, that was pushing on his pituitary. It was making it produce a hormone called growth hormone, which made him get as tall as he eventually was. And so that wasn't normal. It does put pressure. He died fairly young, just mostly I think due to circulation problems. He started to get blood clots. And so basically it talks a little bit about the endocrine system. When I'm talking about the endocrine system, the other system that's really important to talk about is called the nervous system. So the nervous system, remember, is basically going to be made up of neurons. So you have all these dendrites that come into the cell body. So the cell body looks like this. And then you have an axon that comes way down here. And then you're going to have another neuron there. A bunch of dendrites to the cell body. Now this distance right here, the separation between the two is called a synapse. A synapse is going to be a gap between neuron 1 and neuron 2. Now, why is the synapse important? Well, we get control over the chemicals that we send. But this podcast isn't about the nervous system. And the reason why is that nerves just travel in one direction. From this neuron to another neuron to another neuron. They just go in one direction. And so my analogy is it's like Gmail. When you send an email from one person to another person, or they send it from one person to another person. That's like the nervous system. You're sending a message from one person to a clear destination. And that's the nervous system. It's really fast. And it's going to target a specific cell. And so when we use the nervous system, we have to be really quick. So if somebody were to throw something at me and I were to dodge it, that would be my nervous system. So the endocrine system is more like Facebook. If I were to post to my Facebook status update that I am working on a self-communication podcast by myself, I brought it, and I just put it out there, there's going to be a delay. There's going to be time before other people look at it and dislike it or like it or respond to it. And so that's going to be more like the endocrine system. I'm sending it out to everybody, and whoever wants to respond to it. And so basically keep that in the back of your mind. What are some terms that you should understand? First of all, anything that is going to send out these messages in the endocrine system is called a lining. And we'll go over 10 important lines. The chemical that they send out is called a hormone. And then it's going to target cells, or not. It may target certain cells, or it may not target other cells. So we can send, for example, follicular stimulating hormone from the pituitary is only going to affect the ovaries and the testes. But if we send out growth hormone, that's going to affect all the cells in the body. So what do those hormones do? They simply diffuse throughout your body. They're going to spread throughout your body. And so they're going to bump into cells, or not. They're going to spread throughout your whole body. And that's why if you've ever felt like an adrenaline, almost in a car accident, you just feel like almost something coursing through your body. That's going to be the system. Now, when they find cells, one of two things can happen. If they are a water-soluble hormone, example could be epinephrine or adrenaline. They're water-soluble. Basically, what they're going to do is the surface of their cell. Since they're water soluble, they can't gain entry to the cell. And so usually what they'll do is they'll set up some kind of a signal transduction pathway, they'll have some kind of an action out here, or have another action inside the nucleus where we can make certain proteins or certain proteins, transcribe certain genes. But that would be water soluble. We also have what are called lipid soluble. So testosterone is an example of that. Basically, since it's lipid soluble, it's going to move right through that the lipid bilayer that is the cell membrane, and it also can target with the cell membrane in the nucleus. Because again, there's going to be a lipid bilayer here as well. And so lipid soluble hormones are going to move all the way into the cell. Water soluble is just going to dock with the receptor protein on the surface. And so here's our endocrine system. So the endocrine system is not as tightly linked together like the circulatory system. But again, it doesn't have to be because it's sending hormones throughout the whole body. And so basically, we've got glands going all the way up the top to from the pineal gland all the way down to the ovaries and the testes and the body. And so basically, what I want to do is I've chosen 10 glands in the endocrine system, 10 that I think are pretty important. There are more than that. And then I've just chosen one hormone for each of these glands. Let's start at the top. First one's going to be the pineal gland. Pineal gland is going to be right here. Basically, what the pineal gland is going to secrete is a chemical called melatonin. It does that only when it's nighttime. And so if your eyes are open during the day, you're not going to be secreting melatonin. But when you close your eyes at night, it's going to start giving off melatonin. And so basically what that does is it allows our brain to tell what time of the day it is, and it also allows us to figure out what season it is. And so basically we can set up what's called our circadian rhythm. So it's basically our internal clock and pineal gland doing it. Next, let's move down here. This part of our brain is actually called the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is kind of the connection between the brain and the endocrine system. And so they can secrete hormones as well, but we're going to say it's influencing the pituitary. We're going to talk about what the pituitary does. The pituitary, basically, if we're going to look at it like this, the pituitary, let me blow that up a little bit. So the pituitary is going to go down like this. So it's going to have two lobes to it. It's going to have the anterior means towards the front or towards the head, and then it's going to have the posterior. Posterior is going to be towards your chest. And so what's the anterior pituitary give off? Well, it gives off growth hormone. It gives off a number of other things. Endorphins, stimulating, it gives off all these different hormones. But one that we're going to talk about is growth hormone. What's growth hormone going to do? Growth hormone, again, is going to flow throughout the rest of the body. You can do that in the circulatory system or throughout the interstitial fluid. And basically, it's going to cause the cells to grow. So they're going to get bigger. When we talk about the next one, anterior, or to the posterior pituitary, it gives out oxytocin, but the one important hormone we're going to talk about is antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. And so antidiuretic hormone, well, you know what diarrhea is. So what is antidiuretic? Antidiuretic is going to be a hormone that holds on to fluids inside our body. Where is that going to go? It's going to go to our kidney, because our kidney's in control of osmoregulation. What's the next one? Next one, as we work our way down, is going to be the thyroid. So we're going to go all the way down here. This will be the thyroid gland. It's right in here. Basically, it does two things that are important. It gives off what are called T3 and T4. Those hormones and the numbers relate to the number of iodine atoms that are found in it. And so basically, you've maybe heard of goiter when you get an inflamed thyroid. Basically, what our thyroid does is it regulates metabolism. And so it's going to give off these two chemicals, T3 and T4, and that's going to speed up metabolism inside our body. And so if you have a hyperactive thyroid and you have high metabolism, you have an inactive thyroid and you have a really slow metabolism. And so basically it's controlled. The other thing that it does is it secretes something called calcitonin. And again, endocrine systems are really important feedback loops. And so the calcium that we have in our blood, the level that we have is super important, especially in nerves and in muscle fibers. If we don't have the correct amount of blood, calcium will die. And so basically what the thyroid does is that when you secrete the thyroid, it's going to lower the calcium. Where's the calcium going to go? It's going to go back into we're going to excrete some to the kidneys, but it's going to go back into the bones. And so there's another hormone that kind of goes with that. So this looks like a butterfly. There are going to be these tiny little hormones that are called the parathyroid that sit right within the thyroid. And they're going to secrete something called parathyroid hormone. What does that do? Well, if the blood calcium level goes too low, it's going to raise the blood calcium. And so these two, the thyroid and the parathyroid, together to basically keep the blood calcium level correct. It's the same way that insulin and glucagon work in the pancreas. Speaking of which, let's go to the next one. And so the pancreas, it's kind of hard to see this diagram, but the pancreas is going to sit right here. It's again behind the stomach, and it's going to empty right here to the duodenum. So it's going to empty enzymes. But it's also on its surface, it's got beta and alpha cells that are going to secrete insulin and glucagon. Insulin is going to be secreted if we ever need to lower the blood sugar, and glucagon is going to need to raise the blood sugar. So basically what insulin does is when it's secreted, it allows our cells to take in that blood sugar, that glucose. And glucagon, when we release that, it's going to release more of that insulin from glycogen. So that's the pancreas. On the top of our kidneys, at least if you have kidneys right here, on the top of them we have our adrenal glands. The adrenal glands have two parts to it. The adrenal cortex is going to be on the outside. The adrenal cortex is basically what secretes glucocorticoids. And so if you ever have an injury and you get a huge amount of inflammation in it, they secrete anti-inflammatories. So if you've ever taken an anti-inflammatory example, like Advil, basically the glucocorticoids are going to do the same thing. They don't need to act right away. And so these are actually connected by hormones to the pituitary. So the message can come from the brain, an injury, down to the pituitary, and eventually to the adrenal cortex. But that's not what you're familiar with in the adrenal gland. You're familiar with adrenaline. So there's a nervous connection from the brain all the way down here to the center of the adrenal gland. That's called the adrenal medulla. Basically, what is it going to have to do? It's going to secrete epinephrine. Epinephrine is adrenaline. It's going to go throughout your body, and it's going to trigger that fight or flight response. And so if you almost get in a car accident, the nervous system is going to allow you to not get in that car accident. But after that, you're going to feel this adrenaline coursing through your body. Metabolism is going to speed up. You're going to suppress your digestive system. You're going to become more alert, and that's all as a result of the adrenal. Okay. Next, we've got, down at the bottom, we just have the sex hormones and the sex glands. We've got the ovaries, and so this is being females, and then the testes. Ovaries are going to give out estrogen, testes are going to give out testosterone, among other things, but basically those are responsible for the female and male sex characteristics. Now, when you go through puberty, before you go through puberty, they're not really cranking out a lot of estrogen and testosterone. But once you go through puberty, they're getting a signal from the pituitary gland that says now it's time to make these sex hormones, and then you go to sex. Okay. So how'd you do? Can you remember the 10 glands? Can you remember the hormones that they secreted and what they did? Well, let's try.
Yeah, it's stuck again.
This one, you want to go back?
Yeah.
So, yeah, just there.
Wake up. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you should roll the change. Where was it?
Down.
So it's the presentation.
All right, questions on endocrine system? What do you need to know? What's important? Okay. So about the different glands that we talked about, you need to know approximately what they do in terms of location. You need to know in terms of how they work and what they do, what kind of hormones they secrete. You need to know the difference between endocrine versus exocrine, the difference in terms of how that functions. You need to know about the fact that hormones is a long-acting technique, although there can be some short-term stop-along delay. Make sense? We talked about the hormone system being related to the cardiac side and also to the nervous system. We kind of saw a lot of that. But extend after come back at quarter after. Let's see if we can't finish you out in the time.